Good evening, everyone. Welcome to a meeting of the Hunterdon Central Regional High School Board of Education. Please be advised that this and all meetings of the board are open to the public and media, consistent with the Open Public Meetings Act, and that advance notice required therein has been provided. Meeting notice was also posted in the boardroom of the Upper School campus, sent to the Courier News, Star Ledger, Express Times, and the Hunterdon County Democrat, and sent to the clerks of Delaware Township, East Amwell, Flemington Borough, Raritan Township, and Reddington Township. The public will have an opportunity to be heard as shown on the agenda. We'll stand for the flag salute. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, at this time, we're going to read our district mission statement. Sandra?
It's my pleasure to read that. Hunterdon Central is an innovative educational community dedicated to the intellectual, social, and emotional safety and growth of all students. While fostering curiosity and promoting wellness, we aspire to create powerful learning experiences, establish strong partnerships, and serve as contributing members of society.
Thank you. At this time, we'll be doing the oath of office for our new board member, Claudia Gray. She's doing good.
I, Claudia Gray,
do solemnly swear
do solemnly swear
that I will support the Constitution of the United States
that I will support the Constitution of the United States
and the Constitution of the State of New Jersey,
and the Constitution of the State of New Jersey,
and that I will bear true faith and allegiance to the same
and that I will bear true faith and allegiance to the same
and to the governments established in the United States
and to the governments established in the United States
and this state under the authority of the people, so help me God.
and this state under the authority of the people, so help me God.
I state your name,
I, Claudia Gray,
do solemnly swear
do solemnly swear
that I possess the qualifications of membership prescribed by law,
that I possess the qualifications of membership prescribed by law,
including specifically that I am not disqualified as a voter
including specifically that I am not disqualified as a voter
pursuant to R.S. 19:4-1,
pursuant to R.S. 19:4-1,
as well as I am not disqualified
as well as I am not disqualified
due to a conviction of a crime or offense
due to a conviction of a crime or offense
listed in N.J.S.A 18A:12-1.
listed in N.J.S.A 18A:12-1. I, Claudia Gray,
Do solemnly swear
do solemnly swear
that I possess the qualifications prescribed by law
that I possess the qualifications prescribed by law
for the office of member of the Board of Education,
for the office of member of the Board of Education,
and that I will faithfully, impartially, and justly perform
and that I will faithfully, impartially, and justly perform
all the duties of that office according to the best of my ability, so help me God.
according to the best of my ability, so help me God.
Thank you. Congratulations.
Thank you.
So we'll do a roll call, Mrs. Spitzer.
Mrs. Duggan?
Here.
Ms. Gong?
Here.
Dr. Halpern?
Here.
Mrs. Kellogg?
Here.
Ms. LaCosta?
Here.
Mrs. Peterson? Ms. Rothel?
Here.
And Ms. Gray?
Here.
And Mrs. Santangelo?
Here.
Thank you.
At this time, we are going to convene into executive session. Can I get a motion and a second?
Move to go into executive session?
Second.
Second.
Roll call, please.
Mrs. Duggan?
Yes.
Ms. Gong?
Yes.
Ms. Gray?
Yes.
Dr. Halpern?
Yes.
Mrs. Kellogg?
Yes.
Ms. LaCosta?
Yes.
Mrs. Peterson? Mrs. Rothel?
Yes.
And Mrs. Santangelo?
Yes. And just for the public, we will probably be in executive session for about a half hour. Thank you.
Oh, for the timer.
You hit the key, it'll come out of sleep.
Okay.
And when
Oh
you're
my God,
ready
sorry,
for
Lisa.
the,
That's okay.
when you're ready for the superintendent's report, if you would just turn the projector on.
Turn it on, should I turn it on while I speak, or turn it on before we, like, walk down? Okay. Thank you.
Ready? You're ready?
I'm ready.
All right, thank you everyone for your patience. I would like a motion and a second to reconvene into open session.
I motion. Second.
Roll call?
Mrs. Duggan?
Yes.
Ms. Gong?
Yes.
Ms. Gray?
Yes.
Dr. Halpern?
Yes.
Mrs. Kellogg?
Yes.
Ms. LaCosta?
Yes.
Mrs. Peterson?
Yes.
Mrs. Rothel?
Yes.
And Mrs. Santangelo?
Yes. All right, currently, right now, we're going to be doing our ethics training. Mr. Giacobbe is here. He's kind enough to take the time to do our ethics training that is required in public. So with that, we'll turn it over to Matt. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. Sorry, my back's to you. I'm not going to do it singing, even though I could be a thespian at times. So I've handed out to you an outline on the School Ethics Act and school ethics decisions, and it covers the entire law. And so what I want to do tonight is explain to you what is the School Ethics Act. Within the School Ethics Act, and it's a statute, it's a statutory requirement that you have to follow. And as you saw just earlier this evening, we saw Ms. Gray take the oath of office, and you agreed to uphold the laws of the state of New Jersey and the federal government, the U.S. Constitution, state constitution. You're taking an oath of office, and part of that oath of office is that you're going to follow the School Ethics Act. And within the School Ethics Act is a code of conduct of what you have to follow. And what I've done is I've outlined the entire act, and then within it there are cases that deal with each aspect of the code of ethics and what's required of board members. But I'm going to summarize it. I'm not going to go through the whole outline because I think it's around 20 pages long. So this is something that you can look at if you have questions. Talk to the board president, talk to the superintendent, and then they can involve me, and I can give you guys guidance. The School Ethics Act is interesting, and I represent a lot of municipal governments, county governments, state entities, and when you're a board member, you're an elected official. You get elected just like the other elected officials get elected, but your role is very, very different. You make the policies. And what are the policies? The policies are the laws that govern the school. When you're in a municipality, they pass ordinances that are the laws that govern the municipality, zoning ordinances, etc. You create the laws that operate the schools. And a lot of the policies that you create, some of them are mandated by law, such as the harassment, intimidation, and bullying. It's mandated by law that you have to have a policy that addresses that. What you guys don't do is you don't get involved in the day-to-day operations. And you'd ask yourself, well, why is that the case? Well, the case is somewhat logical because many people who sit on boards of education have kids in that school. And I don't know about you, but when it involves my kids, they're right, you're looking out for your kids. It's kind of like, Papa Bear or Mama Bear syndrome. So the legislature, when they crafted it, they said, we're not going to have board members involved in day-to-day operations. They're going to make sure that the district is well-run, that things are being operated appropriately. You set the policies, you set the rules, you fund the operation, and then you let the chief school administrator execute on the plan. And so the analogy I like to use is you guys are a pro football team. And the board members, you're the owners. You're in the owner's box. You're not down on the field calling the plays. You're funding the operation. You're making sure that, they have the jet to get to the faraway games, etc. You're hiring your coach. And your coach who runs the day-to-day operations is Jessica. She runs the thing. She makes the hiring recommendations. She makes the non-renewal recommendations. She figures out who's the best teacher for this class versus that class. She's your coach. And if things aren't running right, the person that you hold accountable and the only person that you evaluate, the only person that you hire is Jessica. Now, what's important is, as board members, you guys aren't just elected officials. You're the employer. You employ Jessica and you employ lots of people. And so the rules that you pass, these policies, are the rules for not only Jessica, but all the employees. You have policies about what employees can and can't do on social media. You have dress code policies. You have workplace harassment policies. And these are policies that you update all the time. They're not just stagnant policies that you pass once. Your policy committee has to look at them. Laws change, they evolve, and you have to make sure that these policies are up to date, et cetera, so that your employees know the rules of engagement. And the policies is where any employee can look and say, oh, what can I do politically in the classroom? Well, you can't. There's a policy on that. What can I do on social media? What can I write? Can I take positions on things? There's a policy on that. You, as a collective body, do that. Now, no individual board member has any power whatsoever. None. Your power, though, is fairly awesome when you come into this room. You, as a collective body, have a tremendous amount of power, and that power is that you and the other school districts, when you look at your tax bill, you guys are the largest portion of the tax bill. And because you're educating kids, it's a people business. You're hiring teachers, you're hiring bus drivers, you're hiring custodians, this whole team of people that Jessica orchestrates every day to make sure that your children and the children of this regional high school system are getting a good education. Every kid, whether they have special needs, whether they're the highest achieving kids, they're all getting a great education. And so when you come together, you're setting a budget, and you guys are in the budget season, and you're going to get your state aid numbers, I think, Thursday or Friday, and your budget is due to the county, I think, March 19th. That's where a lot of power resides. And you know what? When you have a well-run school system, which you guys are all in, you took the oath of office to make sure it's well-run, not run it, but make sure it's well-run, it also has a huge impact on all of your property values and all those folks that are sitting out here. Because when you have a high-performing district, people want to move to high-performing districts. And so you guys have awesome responsibilities, and I can tell you, if you look at your tax bill, and I know I represent a number of municipalities, and they like to point it out, well, we're only 20% of your taxes. It's the school that is 60% of your taxes. But if you look at it, the county is usually 20, the municipality is about 20, and the lion's share of it are the school districts. And so if you think about it, you guys are controlling the biggest purse strings in your respective towns, and you're setting policy by which all of your employees will be following that policy so that you have a great school district for your kids. Now, the School Ethics Act, there are certain things that the School Ethics Commission looks at. I would tell you that the thing that angers them the most, absolutely gets them bananas, is when there's breaches of confidentiality. Because as a board, you guys meet, almost every meeting I would imagine you guys have executive session. And in those executive sessions, you're discussing employee matters, whether somebody should be let go, whether somebody's on a family medical leave issue. You're discussing student matters, could be disciplinary, could be HIB, it could be the special ed placement. These are highly confidential matters. So you guys are entrusted with very, very confidential information that can't ever leave the confines of executive session. And so the School Ethics Commission, they look at that and they say, you as elected officials, you're being entrusted with very, very confidential information that directly impacts students and staff's lives. So you have to keep that confidential. That's something that they want to make sure. Now, some of the things that are quite obvious are, you can't vote for your husband's company to appoint them. That's a violation, and I think everyone would understand that. It gets more nuanced, and in our handout we have it, is the School Ethics Act is very particular about your involvement if you have a family member that works for the district. And I have a whole list in there about what family members are. Well, clearly your spouse, your child, those are family members. But it could be a nephew, a niece, those are family members. So you have to know who works in the district and what does that do for you in terms of voting. So let me give you an example. Let's hypothetically say that you get elected and your brother works in the district as a teacher. I mean, you're allowed to get elected. If you're elected, you can't hire your brother as a teacher, but if your family member's here in the district working and you get elected, what does that mean for you? Well, what it means for you is that you can't be involved in collective bargaining negotiations, you can't vote on a collective bargaining agreement, you can't be involved with grievances. There's all these nuances, and it goes farther. Let's hypothetically say that your spouse is a teacher, member of the NJA in Hillsborough. Can you vote? The answer is you can't participate in the negotiations, and so long as your spouse isn't the lead negotiator in that other district, you can ultimately vote on the final memorandum of agreement, but you can't participate in the creation of it. And so one of the roles that we play as a board attorney is we will give you, I'll send you a questionnaire that you guys can all complete, and we will give you an analysis of what parameters that you can vote on, what parameters you can't vote on, if you have conflicts, etc. And the benefit of it is it gives you guys, an idea of how nuanced this can be. And we will give each one of the board members that opinion, and we'll give it to both Jessica, the board president, and the BA so that they can help guide you through it. Now, the one benefit of being a board member is that the School Ethics Commission will issue advisory opinions. So they won't issue it to you if you've already voted. If you voted and said, I don't know if I should have voted, let me get an advisory opinion, they won't give you a get-out-of-jail card. But before you vote, we can get an advisory opinion for you. And I'll give you an example of a unique one that we got. Usually, if there's a phone call, and we get a phone call saying, is this an ethics violation, or can we vote on this, or can we not? We can give you an answer. There's generally either an advisory opinion or an ethics case on it, so we could give you guidance. But I'll give you an example of one I had a number of years ago. I had a board member in a district I represent who was a Division I collegiate athlete, phenomenal athlete. And in her, she no longer a Division I athlete, she became a referee for the NJSIAA in gymnastics competitions. She was a college gymnast. And she never did any officiating at the district that she was on, ever, because she said that'd be a conflict. Then she thought to herself, she said, you know what, I've been asked to do the big county meets and the state finals. What if one of the kids from the board I'm on is in the state finals? Can I officiate, or is that an ethics violation? Well, I can assure you there's no advisory opinion on this one. So we wrote to the School Ethics Commission. They said, no, that would not be an ethics violation because it's just happenstance that that kid that's in your district makes it to the finals and you're officiating it. That's an example of when you would get an advisory opinion. There's advisory opinions on all kinds of things. And the thing that I also caution board members on is where I see a lot of board members that get in trouble, and we defend quite a few ethics cases because the insurance companies assign them to attorneys in my firm, is the use of social media. Social media, people say things and do things on social media that it doesn't go away. It's there for good. And the School Ethics Commission says that you don't give up your First Amendment right if you're a board member. You can espouse your First Amendment right, but you must use a disclaimer. You must say that this is my opinion, not that of the board. Because if you don't, people in the public might presume that, Lisa's position on this is she's speaking for the board. So you need to have a disclaimer. Now, the simple thing is, you're taking a position on national politics or something like that. You use a disclaimer. But you have to be mindful that the disclaimer is not a get-out-of-jail-free card. You can't use the disclaimer and then just start trashing people. And there's a case that took place in North Jersey where the board president was not a fan of the local NJE president of the school district. Didn't like the union, didn't like the person. They're all from the same town, and had a blog in which he had a disclaimer, this is my own opinion, not that of the board, and then he just went after the union president because he didn't like the NGA, he didn't like this person. So the NJA hired an attorney, they filed ethics charges, and ultimately the School Ethics Commission removed them and said, you're not allowed to do that. She's an employee of the board. You might not like her, that's okay, but you keep that private because you're an employer. You're not allowed to do that. You're not allowed to disparage that person publicly. And just because you use the disclaimer, you don't get a go free from jail card. You're off the board, 6-month suspension. So that's one example where, and so I just tell people, if you wouldn't say it to your grandmother, if you wouldn't talk about it at Thanksgiving dinner with your grandmother, don't write it on social media because nothing good comes of it. Like personally, I've never been on Facebook or Instagram. Why? Because I've seen it destroy way too many people's lives because they write or take positions. And you as a board, your power is in this room collectively when you get together. And so when board members leave and start writing things on social media, or that, it's very divisive and it doesn't help the board function as a whole because, as I said before, individual board members have no power. When you come together, you have lots of power. So I think it's very important that before you hit send or you post on social media, you have to be extremely careful. And if it involves the board, it's verboten. You shouldn't be doing it. Any type of announcement that goes out should be being sent out by your superintendent. Any type of social media should be collectively decided on by the board, and it's put out by your superintendent. Because you guys work as a team, not as individuals. And when a team's working together collectively, usually you got much better results. We saw that recently in the Super Bowl, with one team working much better collectively than the other team. So I don't know if you guys have any questions. What I would encourage you to do is I will send to Jessica the questionnaire. This isn't a gotcha questionnaire. It's a questionnaire I use in a lot of districts, all of our districts, and we have you fill it out. And then we will give you an individual assessment of what you can and can't vote on. It's really so that you don't get in trouble voting on collective negotiations, on, if you're involved in certain, you're on the PTA or PTO, what you can and can't do. We try to give you guidance so that you know, and it'll, trigger something in your mind saying, you know what, I should ask about this before you vote. Because the one thing I will tell you is, nothing that you generally do on boards, very rarely is there an emergency. Very rarely is a school catches on fire. Very rarely is there something that you have to take action immediately. Usually your agendas are published way in advance. There's discussions. So when in doubt, you pick up the phone, you ask your superintendent, and then we can give you guidance on whether or not you should recuse yourself or not recuse yourself. And my final thing is, what is a recusal? So a recusal is you have a conflict.
Excuse me, Matt, before you get there, so just back to all the familial stuff. So we'll get a survey, we'll fill it out. So collectively, do we share that information, or is it just kept by our superintendent or our business administrator?
Well, I send the result of everyone, I do it for each one of you individually. Your superintendent and your business administrator will have on their file so that they can give you guidance. If they're at a meeting and something's on, they might say, oh, wait, you know what, Ms. Gong, you have, your nephew is on this thing, you can't vote here. So it's really to help protect you guys from misstepping. And it's important that your BA and your superintendent know that so that they can help give you guidance, because you don't have counsel here, and they know what's on the agenda and they'll know when things are coming up. But let's get back to just what a recusal is. I'm going to end it here. If you have a conflict and you need to recuse yourself, recusal means you don't participate in the discussion. It's not a recusal to take a position, argue about it on the dais, we should do this, we shouldn't do that, and then it comes to a vote and say, I need to recuse myself, I have a conflict. Because your participating in it has now already infected the entire vote. And there's a case that came out of, it was a planning board case, where that happened, where a member who had a conflict and didn't disclose it was participating in the discussions, et cetera, and at the very end recused themselves, and the court said, that's not a recusal, the whole vote's no good. So if you need to recuse yourself, my suggestion would be you step off the dais, you don't participate in the discussion if it's involving something that, and we can give you guidance on it, but if, let's say it's your spouse is an employee and you're voting, you can't vote on the contract, you don't even want to discuss it. Just step off the dais and not discuss it, and that will avoid it. Because the whole goal of this is to avoid ethics charges. And why do you want to avoid ethics charges? Because it costs money. It costs taxpayer money. People are like, oh, the insurance company pays for it. Well, guess what? The insurance companies, you're paying the premium. You got a lot of claims, guess what happens? Your premium goes up. I have 3 sons. I can tell you all about my car insurance, what happened when they were in high school. And you also have deductibles. So the whole goal here is that you're much better off spending money on your kids and your students and your staff than attorneys. And so that would be my strong recommendation, is to, look at this, follow the guidance, and if you have a question, ask before it's too late. All right? Thank you
Matt.
very much.
Matt, I just have a quick question.
Sure.
So you stressed the importance of confidentiality in executive sessions was one of your examples. Is that also applied to committee meetings?
Yeah, it's not just an executive session. If you, let's say you're on a personnel committee, or you're on, if you're privy to confidential information, whether you hear it from the superintendent in her office, or you're at a committee meeting, or you're in an executive session, it's confidential. And confidential means if it involves students, personnel, maybe it's a property acquisition, maybe it's an ongoing litigation, it can't be discussed outside the confines of the board, the committee, or the superintendent. It can't be discussed publicly. And it can literally put the board in a horrific position if you're in litigation, or it could frankly lead to litigation because a family member or a staff member could say, you breached my confidentiality. I didn't want the whole world knowing about my medical condition, or I didn't want the whole world knowing about my kid's medical condition. And that's why, and so you guys are entrusted. When you got voted into office and you took the oath of office, like Ms. Gray did this evening, you're being entrusted with people's lives and their kids' lives, more so than any other elected official.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. Well, thank you very much. Enjoy the meeting.
Thank you, Matt. All right. So at this time, we'll resume the agenda items, starting with the approval of the minutes from the January 27th board meeting.
We do that separately? We do that separately, right?
Yeah. Okay. So can we get a roll call? No. No. I'm sorry. Can I get a motion and a second?
Approve the minutes of the January 27th meeting.
Second.
Roll call?
Mrs. Duggan?
Yes.
Ms. Gong?
Yes.
Ms. Gray?
Abstain.
Dr. Halpern?
Yes.
Mrs. Kellogg?
Yes.
Ms. LaCosta?
Yes.
Mrs. Peterson? Mrs. Rothel?
Yes.
And Mrs. Santangelo?
Yes.
Motion carries.
Thank you. All right, we have correspondence that was received by the board. Those correspondence will be on record in the board secretary's office. Next, we're going to move to the president's report.
Chairman Santangelo, before we move on, I just want to say that for correspondence that I appreciate the email that came in from a parent asking about our health class curriculum, and I appreciate the response that was sent out by our superintendent, so thank you.
Thank you. All right, so the president's report is a new item on the agenda. We will use this report to highlight a variety of topics. In this particular report, I would like to explain the committee structure. These monthly board meetings are more of a formality. In fact, most of the discussion and consideration of issues is done through the committee process amongst board members on and off each committee. I believe it is important to share this process with the public. Our monthly standing committees are Operations and Transportation, Personnel, Policy, and Student Life and Program. The agenda for our regular board meetings is created jointly by the superintendent and board president. We strive to ensure that each item on the monthly agenda has been considered in a committee meeting, which also provides a process for board members not on the committee to share their comments or concerns on those agenda items prior to the regular meeting. This process supports one of the New Jersey School Board Association's most frequently reported norms, no surprises at the board table. There are rare occasions when the administration will need to add a last-minute agenda item. However, we try to avoid that as much as possible. When a parent, staff member, board member, or student highlights an area of concern or requests the board review a particular practice, those items can be directed to a committee for consideration. Each committee has both discussion and action items. Official board action can only be taken with a quorum. A quorum is 5 or more board members. No committee has a quorum. Therefore, a committee can make recommendations to the full board, but cannot act on behalf of the board. The agenda is posted prior to each meeting and available to all board members. All board members can email the committee chair with questions, comments, etc., so that they are fully informed of all board matters. The minutes of these meetings are shared with all board members, providing everyone access and ample time to have their voices heard. Notably, when policies are up for either adoption or abolishment, there is a first and second read across 2 committee and board meetings. This gives board members extra time to reach out to the chair with questions or concerns. Committee meeting discussions are confidential and deliberative in nature. Not all discussion items will become an action item, and action items may remain in the committee for another month for further research and discussion. The items being moved this evening are all action items that have been well thought out and thoroughly discussed throughout the process. Action items are the only items that can be discussed at the board table. And that's it for my report. I will kick it over to Jessica.
Before we kick it off to our superintendent, just a point of information, and thank you for the board processes. That was a lot to go through for the public.
So Sandra, I'm sorry, I want to keep the agenda moving. This is not a time for board comments.
This is a point of information, so I think I'm allowed to speak. So it's a question just for additional business, additional board business. Has that replaced our board comments?
So that's not an action item.
It's a point of information, a question.
Okay, well, it's not an action item on the agenda. Jessica?
All right, good evening, everybody. It's hard to believe we're almost at the end of February. This month seems to have flown by, unlike January. This month, we went through the majority of our QSAC review. That stands for the Quality Single Accountability Continuum, and it serves as a review and evaluation process for school districts with the New Jersey Department of Education. You'll remember last month that I told you we go through this process every 3 years, and we're scored in 5 areas. These are instruction and program, fiscal, governance, operations, and personnel. For each of these areas, there are many indicators that the Department of Education checks. I am pleased to report that we did very, very well in terms of the requirements for each indicator. We will not yet have final scores until later this spring, but I wanted to give you this update so that you had that at least for the time being until we're waiting the scores. We are still waiting for the State Department of Education to look through some documentation, and when we do receive our final report, it will be on a BOE agenda for your approval. I want to thank our district's QSAC team, as well as our Admin 1 team and support staff who helped prepare us for the review and the visit. The amount of documentation we needed was tremendous, and we all spent our day or days with the Department of Education, so I really appreciate that time and that attention. As you know, February also presented us with some weather challenges. We have used 1 emergency closing day so far this year, and we originally had 3 days allotted in our calendar. As I noted in the fall, we recognize that this year's school calendar does not allow for maximum efficiency at the end of the school year. We had informed our staff and families that if we do not use all of our emergency closing days by the end of February, we would revise the calendar to end the school year prior to the state observance of Juneteenth, which is June 20th. Currently, our last day of school is June 23rd, 2025, and graduation is June 24th. However, if we do not use any emergency closing days this week, there's no wood for me to knock on, we will be able to shift the end of the school year, with the last day of school for students being June 18th and graduation on June 19th. So we will notify everyone officially at the end of this week. I also need to share an update with you all on transportation, specifically pertaining to our ongoing discussions with Flemington-Raritan School District and the busing services provided to our community next school year. As you know, the Hunterdon Central Board of Education and the Flemington-Raritan Board of Education have worked together over the span of decades to provide transportation for students in our combined districts by pooling resources and coordinating services. Last school year, our school board decided to terminate the existing Joint Transportation Committee, JTC for short, between our districts, effective the end of this school year. However, the current leadership from our respective districts have agreed to explore a new arrangement that will continue our longstanding cooperation to provide student transportation into next year and beyond. This arrangement is different from the JTC and more akin to a shared services agreement for transportation, which we already have in place with 2 of our other sending districts. I will share more details when they become available. Both districts' leaderships and boards of education are committed to ensuring that all eligible students receive the transportation they deserve at the lowest possible cost to our taxpayers. We look forward to continuing our discussions and partnering with FRSD, and we hope to settle on a new shared services agreement that is equally acceptable to both districts. I'd also like to give a few very noteworthy recognitions tonight as well. I know Bronwyn and Erin, our student representatives, will also have some news, but I will be remiss if I didn't share some recent accolades. We received news that our strength and conditioning coach, Mr. Paul Collodi, was selected as National Coach of the Year from the National High School Strength Coaches Association. This award is given annually to a strength and conditioning coach in recognition of his or her coaching achievements and passion for the profession. On Friday, New Jersey Assemblywoman Michelle Drulis visited to present Coach Collodi with a proclamation recognizing his selection. Coach Collodi has been at Central for over 10 years, and one word that is perfect to describe him is passion. In fact, I asked Coach Collodi to come tonight so we can honor and celebrate him in person, and he informed me that he had multiple training sessions going on tonight and did not want to cancel on the students. However, he did offer to Zoom in from the floor of the weight room. I turned him down. But this is a perfect example of why Coach Collodi is so deserving of this honor. So congratulations again to Coach Collodi. A few other celebrations. Our girls fencing team are officially the District 6 champions. Our chorale singers, Madeline Carvalho, Annalise Guerrero, and Carly Perrine, participated in the All-State Treble Choir this past weekend. They performed at the NJ PAC in Newark. Our Hunterdon Central cheerleaders captured the Group 4 state championship in 3 different categories. And wrestlers Nehemiah Bugosh, Rhett Washleski, and Grant Thompson are District 20 champions in their respective weight classes. So congratulations to them as well. So I'm now going to ask Dr. Hall, Mr. Brandt, and Dr. Hastings to come up to provide an update to you all on our progress with multi-tiered system of supports, which is part of one of our district goals this year. And we're going to go into the front row as they come up and get set up.
we go. Boy, that's tight. Good evening, everybody. I'm Matt Hall, Director of Curriculum and Instruction. And myself, Mr. Hastings, and Mr. Brandt are here to give an update about our multi-tiered system of supports project, or initiative, I guess, is probably better way to describe it this year. And a little bit of a refresher, because we do have several new board members, and of course, for the benefit of the public. We'll do a little bit of a refresh on what we're talking about when we talk about our multi-tiered system of supports, and then we'll shift into what we've been accomplishing so far this year. So, as a reminder, when we talk about this system, what we're really talking about is a sort of a number of different support structures that are articulated to one another to support students in being successful in school. So ultimately, what that means is graduation, right? And so there are 4 different pillars. We can almost think of the multi-tiered system of supports as a stool with 4 legs, right? And so those 4 pillars, or the 4 legs of the stool, are the academics that the students engage in and their academic success. There's social emotional growth, behavioral, and also attendance. And so when we see students who are, they're having difficulty in one of these areas, there are a number of strategies to support them in one or more of those. And as those all come together in a system, that's what we mean when we talk about this multi-tiered system of supports. So to the tiering piece of this. So when we talk about multiple tiers, what we're talking about is different levels of intervention that are brought to bear when students are, when they need support. And so as a first tier, when we talk about tier 1 interventions, what we're talking about are the types of things that every teacher does every day within the classroom, the regular classroom environment, to support their students' learning. This has been a big focus this year in really codifying what we're talking, what we've begun to refer to around here as high impact instructional priorities and practices. And so there's been at multiple board meetings and many of our meetings and professional learning around the district, that is the buzz this year. So that is our tier 1. Every student receives tier 1 support. That's, those are all that's the classroom differentiation. That's the small group sort of mini lesson type thing that happens within the classroom. That's additional support, answering questions, all of those types of things. And sometimes students need additional support beyond what happens in the regular classroom. So a more intensive type of support. And that's what we talk about as tier 2, okay? So the sort of diagram that we use here to describe this is a pyramid. And the reason that that's how it's portrayed is because what you're seeing is the percentage of the population that tends to receive those supports. So at the bottom of the pyramid is the largest. All of the students are there. Tier 2 is really tends to be, a smaller percentage, 5 to 15% of the students. Okay? Now, if further support is needed, more intensive support is needed, that's when we have a tier 3 support. And that tends to be the types of supports that require a change of program, so a special program of some type that is more intensive, the most intensive, for the smallest percentage of students. And this is sort of a fluid system. So students will, be within the tier 1, sometimes up into the tier 2, up into the tier 3, and then as they are meeting with success, can move down. So it's, there isn't any part of this system where sort of, somebody gets there and that's where they're stuck now, right? So that's important to sort of consider. So I'm going to pass it to Dr. Hastings, and he's going to sort of contextualize it with a sort of a hypothetical student for you. So, Dr. Hastings.
Thank you, Dr. Hall. So in order to understand how MTSS and the district staff comes together to utilize MTSS services, we're going to contextualize this in a case study like Dr. Hall had said with Jonathan. So everybody meet Jonathan. He's a fictitious 9th grade student who attends HCRHS. And there's a lot of areas of support that Jonathan is in need of right now. So first of all, he's not attending school, okay? He has an attendance rate of 65%. He's missing 5 to 6 days of school per month, okay? As he's not attending school, his academics and his academic propensity is decreasing. So assessment data has shown that in this hypothetical student is struggling with reading comprehension, specifically with making inferences. Okay. And he's becoming easily frustrated in his academic setting. So he has some off-task behaviors, he has some occasional outbursts, and when he is attending school, sometimes he's even cutting class. So there's a lot of different areas of focus here that the MTSS system needs to address. There's the academic piece, there's the behavioral piece, and there's the attendance piece. So this case study is going to show how everybody works together to address these needs in a hypothetical situation. So starting with academics, he's struggling with reading comprehension, specifically with making inferences. And things like making inferences, using context clues, making connections between texts, these are all standards that are language arts standards in grades 9 through 12. So in his classroom, he's receiving high quality instruction on these skills. So a strategy in that classroom on a tier 1 level could be his teacher modeling making inferences. Maybe she has a passage, she's annotating, and she's modeling different sentences that could be inferential. The teacher could be thinking aloud, oh, this is interesting, this is what the author said, I wonder what this could mean, right? There's targeted direct instruction on inferential thinking. This is happening with Jonathan in his normal classroom and with every other student. But if he's still struggling to comprehend the material for a variety of different reasons, there are some tier 2 supports that the teacher could utilize. So these are examples of some of them. Obviously there are more, but let's say, for instance, all of our students have the opportunity to attend a Block 5 tutorial for extra help with their teachers. A tier 2 support for Jonathan could be a required tutorial, where he'll work in a small group maybe twice a week, and he'll get extra instruction. So what he's receiving in the classroom plus these extra required tutorials. He could also be placed into a response to intervention block in his schedule where progress monitoring occurs. And progress monitoring is where the teacher on a biweekly basis will measure the growth of a skill or a subset of skills. So these tier 2 supports are targeted on his specific academic deficits, and it provides him with actionable strategies to move forward in his academic learning. Okay. On the behavioral front, we mentioned earlier that he's becoming easily frustrated. He could lead to some off-task behavior, some cutting class. So just as required tutorials happened on the academic front, counselor meetings could happen as a tier 2 intervention to meet with him more regularly to discuss his school avoidance, his frustration, his off-task behaviors. And the counselor could work with Jonathan as a tier 2 intervention to develop a signal that expresses his need for help. Help being, maybe I need a break and I need to just walk down the hallway for 5 minutes to the restroom and back. Or maybe I need these directions reclarified for this assignment, okay? The counselor would work with all of his subject teachers to say, hey, here's the signal that Jonathan might display in class. Here's what it means when he says it. And that way everybody can work together to give him the help he needs so that he's not having outbursts in class, or he's not exhibiting off-task behaviors. He's learning coping strategies to help him with his behavior. And as part of that process, Jonathan might also work with his vice principal to understand that there are numerous consequences to cutting class. So it's not just the disciplinary aspect of potentially having an in-school suspension with too many repeated cuts, but also if you're not in class, you may fall further behind in your academics. So the vice principal and the counselor may work with him to help him understand all of what happens as a result of the decision-making process that he's making. As far as attendance, his attendance rate is 65%. He's pretty much at a loss of credit at this point. He's missing 5 to 6 days per month. So an intervention that the vice principal could take on this front is there could be frequent check-ins with his family to provide progress updates. So the vice principal would be talking to his family throughout this process, but maybe that communication happens more frequently at this point. And something that could happen as a Tier 2 support is Jonathan can work with his vice principal to sign an attendance contract to improve his daily attendance, and potentially that percentage rises and he earns back some of those lost credits. And SEL support, meeting with his counselor to combat those school avoidance patterns can take place as well. So as you see through MTSS, teachers are working together, counselors are working together, vice principals are working together, curriculum and instruction supervisors. They're all working within a system to give Jonathan the supports that he needs in order to learn and to graduate and to become successful outside of Hunterdon Central when he graduates. Okay. So I'm going to pass it over to Mr. Brandt, who's going to talk a little bit about how MTSS supports each child's development.
Thank you. So Dr. Hastings gave a case study, if you would, of one student, but we have 2,400 individual students here. And we work to, as most day in and day out, the students are, flying in that Tier 1 area for all those 4 areas. However, using various assessments and evaluation tools, we identify whether or not students need assistance, and temporarily or long-term in that Tier 2 or Tier 3 area, depending on which one of the legs of that stool that Dr. Hall was talking about. So again, that was just one student, and throughout the year it varies as well. Some students have various needs in September versus, right now in kind of the cold of the winter. I've never used one of those. Sorry. And for this last side, where are we now and what we have done so far? Basically, number one, becoming familiar with the terminology. It's a common language. When I first started looking into what MTSS was over the past few years, I realized it's really good teaching and learning and really good supports and program to help the teaching and learning. But the good part of it is it's a common language both within all the different departments in a school, but also within schools. So, for example, the math articulation team that works with the sending districts, they're using this same language as well. So at least it's a common language, and I think that's the first big step. It's almost also, I think, an acknowledgement to the good work. When teachers and counselors and such see the language that's involved in here and they realize, oh, I do that. Oh, I do that. And meanwhile, the state's saying, please do this. It's a good pat on the back to them. Hopefully they realize the good work. Again, I think also this Tier 1 language is an area where staff members hopefully felt you have a license now to use those tools within the classes. Sometimes some of the Tier 1 interventions, maybe teachers may have been hesitant, thinking, am I allowed to use that in here? It's a little different for this student than that student. It is okay. It is okay. That's what good teaching and learning is all about. We have instructional design assistants working with us well amongst the staff, who, as you can see, they're conducting informal classroom walkthroughs to identify that good work. Teaching and counseling can be very isolated at times. So a teacher may be doing great work, and not a lot of other people get a chance to see that other than the students. So this gives us the ability to find out, hey, you know what you're doing right there is excellent. We'd like to spread that out and spread that good word to the rest of the staff members. And that's through the professional development that we have. For example, in January, we had that professional development day after that third back-to-school night. and the staff members had an opportunity to select and go in and sit in on professional development, a lot of it which came out of this work. So appreciate also you guys giving us that time to do that. There's other layers of that as well, whether it's during Block 5 also for staff members to go get help, or also some asynchronous modules for staff members to jump in on and use as they see fit. And then the last step here is working on, as we continue to use Genesis day in and day out and learn all the ins and outs, we hope to be able to have data reports, kind of a data dashboard, if you would, so that we'd be able to more quickly monitor all those 4 areas of MTSS and not have to wait for an emergency or wait for the red light to go on to help these students, but maybe see it coming before we get there. And that's a recap of where we are now. A lot of great work, and I'm proud to be a part of it. Thank you. Any questions? All right. Thank you.
Thank you again, Dr. Hall, Mr. Brandt, Dr. Hastings. One thing I did want to note, but I was trying to wait for the microphone. If you Google multi-tier system of supports, you don't always see attendance as one of the legs of the stool, as Dr. Hall explained. But in New Jersey requires attendance and specifically chronic absenteeism to be a part of the system. So that's why we've incorporated it as well. I think it makes sense. As you know, you really need to be in school in order to learn. So it just really all ties in, but I did want to make that note. So next, I'm going to ask our student representatives, Bronwyn Downey and Aaron Johnston, to deliver their report.
Good evening, everyone. Our names are Bronwyn Downey and Aaron Johnston, and we are student representatives on this Board of Education. Tonight, we will be giving a report about events and ideas directly from the student body.
Starting off the second semester strong, the Triumph Music Honor Society put on a jazz showcase on February 7th with songs all sung and played by our talented Central Music students. For students interested in writing, the Society of Young Authors is collaborating with editors of our student newspaper, The Lamp, with plans to revamp the creative writing section of the website to include poetry and short stories alongside student news. Coming up, Central's cast, crew, and pit orchestra are gearing up for the musical Hello, Dolly, with performances on March 6th, 7th, and 8th, and a show for senior citizens the afternoon, the day before opening night. Finally, our orchestra and band students will be playing in their spring concerts at the end of March.
Surprisingly, winter sports are already coming to an end. We've seen great success across the board, with cheer winning the state championship and placing 9th at nationals. The hockey and fencing teams are currently in states, and spring tryouts will follow shortly after.
At this point, all current freshmen, sophomores, juniors, and the incoming A3 class have selected their classes for the next year, and will be working with their counselors in the coming months to ensure that students are balancing their APs, honors, CP, and electives classes. Juniors and seniors were also able to learn about the college admissions process directly from the admission counselors across the country during the admissions panel on February 20th, and juniors will be doing NJGBI testing in mid-March. College acceptances have been slowly coming out over the past few months, and aside from deferrals and regular decision admissions, seniors are now starting to decide where they will be accepting from now until May 1st.
We held another monthly lunch meeting last week to talk more about the results from the Climate and Culture Survey. Students expressed that they appreciated the variety of clubs offered at Central, but some struggled to find and maintain members. To resolve the issue, we are brainstorming ideas like more club fairs and advertisements on the morning announcements. Our previous student lunch on AI use and outside of the classroom has continued to showcase the impressive ways students are using AI technology to supplement their learning, such as using chatbots to practice conversational skills in world language classes.
Thank you so much for listening to our report tonight, and we are excited to continue to share the passion students have for Central in these next few months.
Thank you so much, Bronwyn and Aaron. And board members, lastly, you'll see our HIB and suspension report. I'll have a report on HIBs for you during executive session. And under organizational items, those are the HIBs that we talked about last month in executive session. So that concludes my report this evening, and I'll pass it back to you, Lisa. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, at this time, we are going to have our first residents forum. This is for action items only on the agenda, so if anyone would like to speak on those items, they can come forward. Okay. Okay, so seeing none, we will move on to organizational items. The first item is regarding the Comprehensive Equity Plan, which is mandated by law, specifically New Jersey Administrative Code 6A:7-1.5. Each New Jersey school district is required to submit a mandatory report to the New Jersey Department of Education, and this is approving the team that will conduct the assessment. I just wanted to mention briefly, I know there's been some confusion with the new Trump administration talking about withdrawing the DEI within the 14 days. So we have not heard anything from the State Board of Education or the state of New Jersey. So we are going to continue to do what we were mandated to do, and that's why it's on the agenda. Second item is the HIB report, which Jessica just mentioned, that was reviewed by the Board of Education in closed session on January 27th. Item 3 is an ad hoc committee needed for the RFP for new legal counsel. The members who agreed to be on the committee are Ellen Halpern, Leslie LaCosta, Rebecca Peterson, and myself. We are scheduled to conduct interviews of prospective attorneys on March 12th. And then the last item is the Board of Education handbook. So with that, I would like to move items 1 through 4. Can I get a second?
Second.
All right. Any comments on the action items 1 through 4?
Have we talked to the board attorney about any members of the board that have litigation against the board being on the legal RFP committee?
No. So you can submit an email request if you'd like.
I will, thank you.
Okay. Any other comments? All right. Can we get a roll call, Mrs. Spitzer?
Yes.
Ms. Gray?
Yes.
Dr. Halpern?
Yes.
Mrs. Kellogg?
Yes on 1 and 2, no on 3 and 4. I'm sorry, yes on 4.
Oh, yes on 4? Thank you. Ms. LaCosta?
Yes.
Mrs. Peterson?
Yes.
Mrs. Rothel?
Yes.
Mrs. Duggan?
Yes.
And Mrs. Santangelo?
Yes.
Motion's carry.
Thank you. All right, now we'll move into our committee reports. I just want to remind everyone, we mentioned last month that we're not itemizing the items on the agenda because everyone can see what they are. We're just doing a brief summary. So with that, I will kick it over to Leslie for Student Life and Program.
Thank you. So the SLMP committee met and had the opportunity to review and discuss accommodations that are needed for making it to championships for wrestling and swim teams. And so with that, we are moving the motion forward for items 1, 2, and 3. Can I get a second?
Second.
Okay, roll call. I'm sorry, any comments? Okay, roll call, Mrs. Spitzer?
Ms. Gray?
Yes.
Dr. Halpern?
Yes.
Mrs. Kellogg?
Yes.
Ms. LaCosta?
Yes.
Mrs. Peterson? Mrs. Rothel?
Yes.
Mrs. Duggan?
Yes.
Ms. Gong?
Yes.
And Mrs. Santangelo?
Yes.
All yes, motion carries.
All right, Jessica?
The Operations and Transportation Committee met on Tuesday, February 18th. In attendance were Sandra Gong, Ellen Halporn, Lisa Santangelo, myself, Jessica Cangelosi-Hade, Heather Spitzer. We also welcome John Weiss and Laura Atwell, our auditors from PKC, who gave a top-level overview of the financial standing of the school district, and at that meeting reiterated what we had mentioned last month, which is that our audit came back with no recommendations or corrective action plan. Once again, thank you to Mrs. Spitzer and her team for a job well done. We're moving actions 1 through 3, which are just annual financial operations, which include financial reports, bills lists, and transfers for approval. Item number 4 requests the acceptance of our annual comprehensive financial report. Item 5 is being moved for approval of the budget objectives for the 2024-2025 annual budget. We are aligning these objectives with our district goals. Item 6 seeks to approve Project Adventure as our proprietary service vendor for the challenge course repairs. Item 7 seeks to approve Learn Well Professional Services as our virtual tutoring service. I'd like to move items 1 through 7.
Second.
Any comments?
Just that, again, I would also like to thank Mrs. Spitzer for all the good work. Thank you.
All right. Roll call?
Dr. Halpern?
Yes.
Mrs. Kellogg?
Yes.
Ms. LaCosta?
Yes.
Mrs. Peterson?
Yes.
Mrs. Rothel?
Yes.
Mrs. Duggan?
Yes.
Ms. Gong?
Yes.
Ms. Gray?
Abstain.
And Mrs. Santangelo.
Yes.
Motion's carry.
Thank you. All right. The Personnel Committee met on February 18th. In attendance was Jessica Cangelosi-Hade, Heather Spitzer, Dee Kellogg, and myself. This month we discussed resignations, new appointments, professional development courses for staff, leaves of absences, in addition to salary advances, advancements per the Hunterdon Central Education Association. So with that, I would like to move items 1 through 21. Can I get a second?
Second.
Thank you. Any comments on the action items?
Ms. Cangelosi-Hade, would you like to add anything about the descriptions, the job descriptions?
The security officer? That's the only one.
Yep, so we've had historically, I forgot I can leave that on. We've had 5 security officers here that we employ in addition to our school resource officer and class 3 officers with Hunterdon Township Police Department. We'd like to have 4 security officers and then a 5th security who kind of is the coordinator as well as our truancy officer. We believe this will bring more cohesiveness to the whole system and better coordination. Not that we're not well coordinated with Hunterdon Township Police Department, but a person who that can be their sole focus instead of it being on the vice principal and or the principal. We also would like to make sure that we're following up on chronic absenteeism and truancy charges. A lot of times right now that requires the vice principal to leave school to follow through with those truancy charges. So by putting this position in place, we'll be able to have a person so that we're not removing the vice principal from school for a day to do that. Thank you.
Thank you for the explanation. All right. Roll call?
Mrs. Kellogg?
Yes.
Ms. LaCosta?
Yes.
Mrs. Peterson? Mrs. Rothel?
Yes.
Mrs. Duggan?
Yes.
Ms. Gong?
Yes.
Ms. Gray?
Yes.
Dr. Halpern?
Yes.
And Mrs. Santangelo.
Yes.
Oh, yes, motion carries.
All right, next we have our Policy Committee. Becky?
So we have a lot of new board members on the board now, so I'm going to give a little rundown for the public and for the board members who haven't had an opportunity to attend new board member training yet, how the process works. First and foremost, boards of education are in fact policy-making bodies. We adopt policies and the superintendent handles the day-to-day of how to implement those policies, which was reiterated in our ethics training. Some of our policies are required to be included in our policy manual, either by state law or regulation. In fact, a significant portion of the 70 policies the committee focused on updating last year were policies required by the state that benefited our CUSAC review. This year, in addition to our regular updates, we're going to initiate a rolling review of each section of the manual. This process can take a month or two for each section, depending on how much wiggle room we have within that section. So this work is going to be rolling year over year. It's not going to be completed in just 1 year. All the proposed policies that we have are available for board members to review once the committee agenda is published. Jess also shares the proposed policies with members of the administrative team for review. We generally get the policy committee agendas out fairly early, so everyone has ample time for that review and can send questions or comments to me prior to the committee meeting, and then I can include those into the committee's deliberations. The unique thing about policies is that the review process spans 2 months, so we have a first and second reading of the policies. Board members have the opportunity to engage in that deliberative process with the policies across 2 committee cycles. I will note that we did not receive any questions or comments prior to this month's committee meetings. We are recommending approval of 12 items for first read, and 8 of the updates are mandated by our policy vendor due to minor changes in the language of statute or regulation. And this month, aside from our regular updates, we focused our attention on the board's bylaws, which are pretty old. The updates to the bylaws align with the district's goal of supporting community engagement and connectedness by increasing operational transparency and ensuring that we're keeping our stakeholders well informed. We also have 2 items on for abolishing, but they are not actually being abolished. The language is just being moved into other policies. So there really is no abolishing language, it's just moving around. The committee unanimously agreed on all agenda items that should be recommended for approval to the board. There are no items on for second read this month because we have just started our work for the year. I will note that as of 4 o'clock today, I did not receive any questions or comments from any board members about any of the items on this agenda. So if there are any concerns, they can be sent to me prior to the March committee meeting, and those concerns can be incorporated into the March discussions. And with that, I move items 1 for 12 for approval on the first read and 2 items to abolish for the first read.
Can we get a second?
Second.
Any comments on the action items?
A couple of comments and 1 question. So I would like to thank the committee for their work. It was, the minutes from the committee were very thorough. And we also were provided detailed information on the purpose of updating all these policies. So again, I would like to thank the committee for its work, and I think it was a really, really good report out this month. I continue to have the same concerns with the nepotism policy that I had last year, but I won't reiterate all of those. And I did have 1 question on the legal services, in that the way it's currently written, where we're not allowed to expend any funds for litigation without a board vote, I guess, how would that work if the board is the subject of the lawsuit? So if we need to respond within a certain amount of time, would we be calling a specific, special board meeting to approve that? Or is this only, approving expenditure of funds for litigation if we are initiating the litigation?
So I would just recommend emailing that question to the chair, and then we can put that in the committee for discussion. So this way we all can have a chance to deliberate. That's the process. So any other comments?
My apologies to Mrs. Peterson because I sent my email after 4 o'clock today. But having been on policy committee last year, I still have a question about, again, combining nepotism and collective bargaining. So you're going to tell me to send an email?
Yes.
I'll send an email.
Thank you very much to keep with the process. All right. If there are no other comments, then we will take a roll call.
Just 1 other comment. I'm sorry, on policy 0174, legal services. It seems that, and correct me if I'm wrong, are we sort of bypassing our business administrator or making it, more of a committee in terms of what gets approved for legal services?
So again, I would just recommend that you email the chair so we have a record and follow the process. Thank you.
Got it. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Roll call, thank you.
Ms. LaCosta?
Yes.
Mrs. Peterson?
Yes.
Mrs. Rothel?
Yes.
Mrs. Duggan?
Yes.
Ms. Gong?
So since I have questions, I guess I'm saying that number 1 and 3 abstain, or no, actually. And all others, yes. Is that the way it should be done?
Do you mean item 3 on the actual motion, bylaw 0142.1 and bylaw 0174?
Correct.
Yes. So, okay. And yes to all other?
Yes.
Okay. Ms. Gray?
Abstain?
Dr. Halpern?
Abstain.
Mrs. Kellogg?
No to 0142.1 and 0174, and yes to the rest.
And Mrs. Santangelo?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, so we'll move on to additional board business. This is where we would want to see anything new added to or suggested to the committees.
I just had to think about it.
No comments? Okay, so next is our final residence forum. This is for anything on the agenda or general comments. If anybody's interested, they could come up to the podium.
Good evening. My name is Al Bischoff. I'm a senior at Hunterdon Central, and I'm a resident of Raritan Township. I'm here today on behalf of myself, my peers, and my teachers who are concerned about the current political climate and what it means for us here at Hunterdon Central. For those who are dismissive of a statement like this, let me make things clear. From the top down, the rights of students to the quality of education they deserve are being threatened. To what extent, I don't know. I do appreciate the earlier comment on DEI policies. But from what I've experienced and observed is that students and educators alike are afraid. They're afraid of immigration officers making arrests in their classrooms, of laws that make their existence illegal, of haphazard curriculum, censorship, and funding cuts that compromise the merit and integrity of our education. These aren't non-existent problems, they're not arbitrary problems, and the extremely real, tangible fear they create cannot be dismissed. We are living in a state where attacks on our collective freedom and intellectualism are becoming normalized. I enjoy being a student at Hunterdon Central. I enjoy my classes that challenge my critical thinking and understanding of the world without an irrational fear of supposedly dangerous diversity, equity, and inclusion. I enjoy reading the books I want to read, and I've been, for the most part, assured that each and every one of my classmates can walk into our campus feeling safe and supported. We have an exceptional environment here, but as I look to the board in front of me, I implore each of you to consider the power that you have. Because from the top down, we are in a period of anticipation, a waiting game of fear. So protect all of your students, offer us the respect we all deserve as young adults, supporting our freedoms to learn what we'd like to learn, to be who we want to be, and to love who we love. I'm speaking not out of paranoia, but in care of these values and having been alarmed by the kind of rhetoric that's brewing nationally and here in our community. Represent us, all of us, with the integrity that you are meant to uphold. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening, Scott Cohen, Raritan Township. Just two things real quickly, because I was not at the last meeting. I've been coming to Board of Ed meetings for probably the last 15 years, about 85% of those meetings. Unfortunately, I missed last month's. But what kind of troubled me, and I don't know the rationale, so I guess I'm asking the rationale, or for reconsideration, in all of those 15 years, we have had a board comment section. And there's been some really rich discussion amongst the board members throughout all the transitions of the boards and board presidents that we've had over those 15 years. So I'm not quite clear as to why that has suddenly changed this year after a 15-year run or more of having that on the agenda. I think the public would like to hear the discourse and the discussions of what's happening and the thoughts and opinions of people on the board. It feels like there's a sudden silencing of rich board discussion that's happened over all those years in that board comments section. So there may be a good rationale. I have no idea, but it just struck me as odd when I didn't see it last month. I wasn't here. I thought maybe it was a mistake, and now I see it's not on again. So I'm curious as to why that's occurred and what opportunity there is for the public then to hear the perspectives of the board members other than just rubber stamping everything that's on the agenda. So that's item number one. Item number two is in line with what our very studious student just talked about, Elle. I'm deeply concerned about the national landscape and the implications for this school district. We have a tremendous staff here. We have tremendous administrators all the way through to our custodial staff that look at and care after our kids day in and day out. We heard from Dr. Hall, Mr. Brandt, and Dr. Hastings about the MTSS structure, which is aligned to support our school's mission around social and emotional capabilities of our students, which is critical. If our students aren't here and they're not feeling well, then they can't learn. We can't just expect them to walk into a classroom and teach what we think they should know. So I implore this board, as we go forward in whatever direction at the national level, whether the Department of Ed gets abolished and the pressures we're going to feel from a budgetary perspective, that we be very cognizant about the policies that we're putting in place for our students. I know I can count on the administration and the staff to implement and support those policies. I'm not convinced yet, and I hope you'll prove me wrong, that this board will uphold and support these students as the rest of the nation seems to want to cut, carve, and scrape out certain segments of our population. Thank you.
Hi, good evening, ladies. My name is Jessie. I'm coming here from East Amwell, class of 95, Hunterdon Central. Thank you very much. I used to sit right over there for study hall my senior year.
Oh, excuse me. I'm sorry to interrupt. Can you just write your name down on the...
Why, sure.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay.
I'm coming tonight because on ethics, and I actually thought it was pretty interesting that the first speaker tonight also spoke about ethics and the changes to some of the ethics stuff, which ties into what I'm going to ask you guys about tonight. The agenda has a motion to establish an ad hoc committee for the legal RFP for bringing on a new lawyer. My two questions primarily are around who will be on that committee. Is there a plan to have members of the administration for the school on that committee? And if so, will they have any sway in the decision-making for that lawyer? And then the second part of the question then is, are any of you guys going to be on that committee? If so, how will that be decided? The reasons I'm asking is because to me I see potentially some conflicts of interest amongst and within the board on being the people deciding on who gets to be the new lawyer. My primary concern is with Ms. Peterson, as there is a pending legal issue that I think to date has cost the district approximately $20,000 so far, and the fact that she also works for Murray, Nolan, and Baruti, so there could be a personal interest in the outcome of who is chosen for that position. So to me, I see the potential for a pretty big conflict of interest there. And then kind of broadening out from, I think, the more obvious one is back in Miss Rowenthaw was given a $100 campaign contribution from Mrs. Peterson. Unfortunately, I mean, they could be friends, and that could be, you know, a friendly like, hey, let me help you out, but that also then has the auspices of, you know, being more strategic in nature as to why it was given. was it to curry favor? Was it just because they're friends? I don't know. I'm not trying to cast aspersions, but I'm just kind of throwing it out there that it just doesn't really have a good look for you guys. And then kind of, piggybacking off of that, but potentially less so, still kind of, gosh. Back in 2022, Ms. Duggan and Ms. Peterson, they ran together. Is there a potential conflict of interest there in the outcome for who's chosen? Were there any contributions made then to Ms. LaCosta or Ms. Gray that we don't know about? What are, the potential interphrase there? And then Ms. Santangelo, you did speak in favor of Ms. Peterson back in 2023 before you yourself were on the board. Was that out of friendship? Was there a kind of paying contribution that is unknown to us? Again, what are, I guess I'm just kind of asking, what are the potentials for conflict of interest and what lawyer is chosen for this position? Again, not trying to cast any dispersions, just saying that, the looks of it, the optics just aren't necessarily the best. And, this is perhaps where, having some of those board comments would be helpful, kind of, where do people stand and all that stuff. But since that's not really out in the open, seemingly, that, we don't have that available to us as to what those conversations would be. So kind of, again, just putting it out there, what are the potentials for conflicts of interest if you guys are on there? Are there going to be admin people on there choosing those things? And I guess just kind of putting it, apologies. It's been a long day. But just kind of, reminding you guys that the optics aren't really looking so good if a lot of you guys, and in particular certain people, such as Ms. Peterson, are on that committee for choosing the next lawyer. Thank you. That's it. I'll put my number down here too, since it's not just your name on the list, it's also your phone number. And thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Good evening.
Good
I will
evening.
sign in. I'm Susan Tozalowski. As a taxpayer of Raritan Township, I'm concerned about recent decisions made by several board members. There appears to be an unprofessional approach to resolving issues. I think we've heard a little bit about that previous speakers. You're aware that the Flemington-Raritan School District budget issues have resulted in a referendum on March 11th. This potentially will result in a tax increase if it's approved. And I fear that this board will be leading the Hunterdon Central District down the same disastrous path without thought. We all watched the selection on January 27th of Ms. Gray to join the board. Ms. Gray is clearly not as qualified as the other two candidates. It was obvious that the other candidates were both more experienced in working with young people and managing substantial budgets. I've been interviewing candidates my entire career, and that, in my opinion, was a failed interview. It also seems unusual, Ms. Santangelo, as your first order of action as president would be to fire the board's long-standing attorney. This is the same attorney that would have represented our past board member, Noelle O'Donnell, concerning your ethics complaint if it had gone forward. That complaint concerning the rainbow mask that she wore to a Board of Ed meeting in February of 22 was ultimately deemed frivolous. Ms. Santangelo, did you release Gorman, Daniela, and Morlock in retaliation for the $100 fine that you were assessed? This firm represents 30 public school districts and municipalities and has an unparalleled reputation. Your motivation is in question. The fine that you were given was for filing a frivolous complaint that was deemed so by the State Ethics Commission in their own words. Isn't it also true that this frivolous action and other legal expenses have cost the district thousands of dollars that could have been spent on education? I would also like to understand how the new board members, Ms. LaCosta and Ms. Rothel, voted yes to release the legal firm since they are both so new to the board. What did they base their decision on? Shouldn't they be asking more questions? It appears they are blindly following in compliance, and we expect more of the board members. Ms. Santangelo, wasn't it also a violation of the Code of Ethics when you voted for the new attorney, considering the obvious conflict of interest? In closing, will this board's actions under Ms. Santangelo as president be focused on retaliatory acts, personal vendettas, and hidden agendas, or will you make decisions in the best interest of our students, faculty, staff, and taxpayers? Thank you.
Hi, my name is Ed McLaughlin. I'm from Delaware Township, and I think there's some common themes tonight, so I'm going to harp on them as well. An impression of one of the things that I saw transpire tonight, really, it speaks to what I think is a lack of transparency. So I'm here attending these because I would like to hear open public deliberation of questions around policies, how you intend to define policies, how you intend to run the school. And questions came up about the policies around the legal representation, legal services, and it seemed like they were valid questions, and the directive was to Ms. Kellogg to send an email where it would be discussed in committee. Now, the committee, as far as I know, the committee minutes, the committee records aren't public, right, because those are works in progress. So here we've got a question about legal services that are coming up, and rather than having some open deliberation or some open commentary about it, instead, we're being asked to send an email so that it's, quote, on the record, as if the minutes that are being kept here were not a record. But what it looks like to me, the impression it's giving to me, is that it's not something that you want to talk about in public. You'd rather bury it in committee and rather have it, be buried into the policy itself. So it's just not transparent. And I don't want to beat a dead horse, but the fact is that there are two members of this committee, who I think we already discussed, that are now or have been in litigation against this very board. Two members of this board that are now or have been in litigation against this board. Those folks should not be on a committee that is making decisions about legal services or legal representation for this board. It is just an obvious ethics violation. I'm not a lawyer. Maybe it's not. Maybe there's some particular loophole out there that you can crawl through. But from a perspective, from a perception standpoint, it is bad. It just does not look good. So it looks like that you're trying to bury specific topics, keep them out of public conversation. The topic itself, it seems like it is something that that affects directly two members of this board, who those legal services are from. It's just not transparent. And I, for one, am here because I want more transparency. I want deliberation. I don't need deep deliberation on every topic, but if one board member asks, for some clarity on something, I would expect better than send us an email and we'll talk about it in committee, right? So, thank you. That's all.
All right. Seeing no other comments, we'll close out the residents forum, and I will move and ask for a second on convening into executive session. Can I get a second?
Second.
Roll call, please.
Mrs. Peterson, Mrs. Rothel,
Yes.
Mrs. Duggan,
Yes.
Ms. Gong,
Yes.
Ms. Gray,
Yes.
Dr. Halpern,
Yes.
Mrs. Kellogg,
Yes.
Ms. LaCosta,
Yes.
and Mrs. Santangelo.
Yes. So we will be going into executive session for approximately 45 minutes, and we will be coming out and taking action. Thank you. ready? Okay. All right, so can I get a motion and a second to reconvene into open session?
Motion to reconvene.
Thank you. Can I get a roll call, or should we just say? Yeah, we did the second. And Sandra as well. Yeah, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay. All right, so we would like to move items 1, Student Discipline Ad Hoc Committee, the long-term suspension from school. Are we, you know what, let me read this. Move to approve the long-term suspension from school for the following students until the date as indicated in accordance with the decision of Hunterdon Central. Can I get a second?
Second.
Roll call.
Mrs. Rothel? Look, I messed it
Yes.
up. See? Mrs. Duggan?
Yes.
Ms. Gong?
Yes.
Ms. Gray?
Yes.
Dr. Halpern?
Yes.
Mrs. Kellogg?
Yes.
Ms. LaCosta?
Yes.
Mrs. Peterson?
Yes.
And Mrs. Santangelo?
Yes.
All yes, motion carries.
All right, next item is to move item 1, the settlement agreement. We are moving to authorize the board president to execute the following agreement on behalf of the board. So can I get a second?
Yes.
Roll call?
Mrs. Duggan?
Yes.
Ms. Gong?
Yes.
Ms. Gray?
Yes.
Dr. Halpern?
Yes.
Mrs. Kellogg?
Yes.
Ms. LaCosta?
Yes.
Mrs. Peterson? Mrs. Rothel?
Yes.
And Mrs. Santangelo?
Yes.
All yes, motion carries.
All right. And finally, we would like to move with a second to adjourn the meeting. All those in favor?
Aye.
Thank
Before
you.
we do that, so point of order. So I love the whole policy thing because I was looking at 0164. So point of order. So policy 0164 that I think you guys are going to look at next month, it does say board comments. So we've violated our own policy because board comments are contained in policy 0164. So correct me if I'm wrong.
0164 talks about the order of the agenda, so if it is on the agenda, there's a lot of things on 0164, because it was put out in 1998 that we don't do anymore, including student council report and things like that, so
Organizational
when
items.
things
There
are
are,
on the
but-
agenda, they are in a certain order, although we also have not been following that, because it used to do it lists board comments before the second public comment session, so it's actually been out of order for like 30 years.
Right, so it is out of order, but it does contain board comments, so just FYI, we should take a look at that.
Now we can adjourn.